Do me a favor and try something for me, will you? On your Windows computer, open up the Start menu and type in iExpress.exe. And once you hit enter or click on that best match, don't worry, you're not gonna run malware or get a virus or anything, but you will see this kind of weird, old school looking window. This is the iExpress wizard. And I'm serious, try it out. It will work on your computer if you're running any version of Windows greater than Windows 2000. I know, it's super old, but this utility, this tool, has still been shipped with every version of Windows, and it is native and installed by default. This tool will allow you to create a self-extracting or self-installing package. Ultimately, it makes a computer program, like a .exe file, but it pulls out the contents from itself to run a program on your computer. Now, this is kind of interesting and a little clever, right? Especially for malware, viruses, actual threats from hackers, adversaries, threat actors, or penetration testers and red teamers trying to do some sweet stuff for security research, because they're taking advantage of tools and utilities that aren't native to the operating system and what they tend to call living off the land. Now, a lot of you might already be really familiar with this online resource called LOLBAS, or Living Off the Land Binaries, Scripts, and Libraries, and this is a whole collection of all the different programs, applications, and .exe files that are natively, naturally installed with Microsoft Windows that can be used and abused to do different things, other than what they were intended to do, right? Like maybe execute new code, or fire up a DLL, Dynamic Linked Library, to run other pieces of code. Maybe work with some alternate data streams, download files from the internet, hey, pull down credentials, tamper with material, whatever you want. But it's interesting, if we actually scroll to the very top here, I'm trying to introduce this whole iExpress thing, but iExpress.exe actually isn't in this listing of a living off the land binary. But I would go so far as to say you can do some pretty weird, shady, and shenanigan stuff with iExpress.exe. So here's the real favor I'll ask you. Watch this video and then give me your hot take. Let me know, do you think this iExpress.exe tool should be part of the LOLBAS resource? Is it a lolbin or living off the land binary? Let's play with it. What I'm gonna do is open up the terminal and I'll go ahead and move into my desktop here. Let's go ahead and create just a directory for us to work in. We'll call this iExpress.test, and I'll move into that directory. And from there, I do like to do this because I've seen iExpress act weird when you aren't creating a new exe within the same directory that you're already working in. So let me start iExpress.exe from here, and now let's see this thing in action. What we could do is actually create a new self-extraction directive file, or a .sed or sed file. This is kind of the blueprint and, hey, actually the skeleton for what it'll build out as this self-extracting package or executable. Let's click next here, and then you got a couple options for what you want your package to really do. Do you want to extract files and run an installation command? Ooh, a little bit interesting. We could get code execution or fire off a payload like real malware or virus or whatever tooling you might like for your red team engagements, your penetration tests, or cybercrime, threat actors, adversaries. They do this just as well. We could extract files or create a cab file. This is interesting. This is separate from that .sed file, but it's a cabinet file. Some folks might be familiar. It's a Microsoft cabinet file, which you can think of like a zip archive, and that it bundles and packages up files, but it'll naturally and normally work with them super easily on Windows. Let's work with the default. Let's just extract files and run an installation command, because I'm kind of curious what we could get this thing to do. We could define a package title, and like we're literally creating our own installer for whatever software that we want, right? Like a package you would download. We could maybe fake stuff. Hey, we could say, look, I'm gonna build out something for Google Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever software that you want. You could have some social engineering and deception in the mix here. And seriously, you could even have like a confirmation prompt where you ask them, are you ready to install Google Chrome? Or whatever you want. We don't need to do that in this case. We can just say no prompt and keep rolling with the defaults. You could even display a license agreement, like browse to a whole text file to include and display there. Let's click next, and now we could actually include the files that will be bundled up in this package and embedded in the exe itself, acting as a cabinet file, really. I'll tell you more about that in a sec, but first let's add some files that we want to run. This could be our payload. This could be malware or virus, whatever you want. And I'm not going to go through a whole showcase of a Metasploit callback or a Sliver or Havoc connection. I do want to showcase this for the sake of the demo as a little bit more of a proof of concept. So what we'll do is pretty simple. Look, let's just actually use the calculator application. Again, native, built-in, and installed within Windows as part of the system root. See Windows System 32. So let me navigate to there and, hey, enter the calc.exe. Let's add that, and you could add as many of these files as you want, whether it's a DLL or a .batch script or Visual Basic script, .js, JScript file, PowerShell, anything. But we're good with calc.exe. And now you could actually say, this is a program that I want to run, execute, and launch within that. We could specify calc or anything else that we included, or we could even specify a post-install command. So this is our opportunity to execute code. Run a payload, fire off malware, do whatever tradecraft we might like. And we even get a second opportunity to do that with the post-install command. You could add in, again, calc.exe or anything else you packaged. We'll leave that as none for now, but we'll drill down into that more in a little bit later. I think it's really cool, though. You could make this a little bit stealthy. Again, keeping up with your social engineering charade if you went that route, you could totally hide the window so that it's not displayed on the desktop. Or it could run minimized or maximized, but let's be sneaky and let's let this run as a hidden window. We could click next, and even a finished message, like, hey, you successfully installed Google Chrome. And again, we won't need to do that for our example, but it's totally possible. And then we'll build out, okay, where do we actually want to save the package? This is really where we'll specify our directory that we're working in, that iExpress test little sandbox and home that we've made for ourselves. We can call this Google Chrome.exe to keep up the charade. I'll hit save. And you got a couple other options here. Do you want to hide file extracting progress animation from the user? Ooh, heck yeah. We could be even more sneaky and stealthy with that. Another option here to store files using long file name inside package. If you click on that, it gives you a little bit of a warning as to look, it's different in Windows 95 and later and earlier, whatever. Look, we don't need to particularly drill down into that one, but I would like to hide that file extracting progress animation. So let's click next. And then we could even determine, look, do we want to have the user restart their computer after installing this package and application and program? You could specify this if you only restart if needed or always restart. And you've even got a cool checkbox here. Do not prompt the user before restarting. You might be able to do some damage with that. But let's just keep this as no restart so we can play with it. Then it'll build out the sed file, that .sed. By default, it'll fill out the same exact path as we had chosen previously, just with the .sed extension rather than the .exe. So we could go ahead and roll with that. Let's hit next, and then we can create the package. Just hit next, and it will build this thing together with some flashy terminals and command lines popping up, but then it's done. So let's click finish here, and then back in our command prompt, let me actually ls, I'm in PowerShell, so the alias, right? You could dir or get child item full commandlet, but that'll display our Google Chrome.exe and our Google Chrome.sed or sed file. I'll open this up in Explorer so you can see it just as well. And this will show us, look, there is our Google Chrome.exe and the sed file. If I double click on this, what does it do? Pops open the calculator, because that's what we told it to do, right? That's the command that we wanted to run and the bundled up file that will actually extract and run. But if I right click this file, let me take a look at the properties here. You can see our Google Chrome.exe is actually the Win32 cabinet self extractor. And taking a look at like, oh, the details here, well, it's, okay, copyright Microsoft Corporation, product name Internet Explorer, product version, all this stuff actually with the original file name of wextract.exe and then some .mui at the end there. A little bit peculiar, we'll keep that in the back of our mind, but let me actually drill down into this because I think there's something important to showcase. If I use some tools from the sysinternal suite, and a lot of folks might be familiar with that for extra tools and programs to be able to examine files and see what's going on your computer, we could use sigcheck and actually take a look at the signature of the file. This will need to accept a user license agreement, so let's just click agree on that. And it'll display all the kind of help and information on how to use the utility, but ultimately, we just need to pass in, hey, the file that we want to examine here. In this case, that's our Google Chrome.exe. I hit tab to autocomplete that, but it'll tell me, look, even though it all says Microsoft Corporation and it's this like normal, natural Win32 self-cabinet extractor or whatever, it is unsigned. Because obviously we aren't Microsoft. We are not distributing the software on behalf of Microsoft. That's something we do have to take note of. Anything that you build out with iExpress will not be signed unless you add a little bit more to it with your own efforts. But that was all using that iExpress utility. And we could try to take a look at the help information from that. Like as I ran iExpress.exe previously, if I were to use another argument here with like a / and a question mark, that'll tell me a little bit more on how to use this thing. There are other arguments or parameters we could include, like /n to build a package now with a said file name provided, and a quiet mode when using /n, even minimize windows when using /n, even overriding some details, and all that's a little bit peculiar, especially when we talk about that /n, because it's mentioning the said file, right? And we had that in our directory here. So this Google Chrome.exe, again, is actually being built out by this .sed file that kind of defines its structure, what it's doing, and how it works. So let me do something weird. I'll get back into our little explorer here, and I'm going to delete the .exe file. Let me right-click to send that to the recycle bin. Now, all I have left is this .sed file, but I could just as easily recreate it and rebuild it based off this blueprint when I use iExpress.exe, and you don't need to include the file extension, right? Just the command in your path naturally. /n Google Chrome .sed, and it'll build out, all the windows pop up again, the exact same executable file. I could / and run Google Chrome.exe, and it'll pop up on the calculator again. So this is all the stuff that's defined in our .sed file. But what the heck is that? The self-extracting definition, directive, derivative, whatever. Let's open that up in a text editor. I know that's weird, but let me right-click this and try to open with, and I'm using Sublime Text here. You could use Notepad or whatever you might like, but let me just open that. And here we are. What I'll do is actually hit Control-Shift-P to, change maybe the syntax. I'll just use bash because it's nice and easy, but basically it's like an INI file structure where we have a version defined for class iExpress, said version 3, and all this is plain text, right? Like we could play with this. We see the package purpose that we chose to install an app, but some of those other things like to create a cab file or to extract only might be other values here. And then the show install program window could be 1 or 0 or whatever. We could toggle that, and you could see all the things like hiding the extraction animation. We had clicked that radio button, but we could toggle the values here if we wanted to. Use long file name, inside compress, cab fix size, reboot mode even, N for no, right? And then it actually includes like what looks like variables. You might be used to this kind of wrapped around % syntax for like DOS or batch variables you would use in scripts in old school cmd.exe. It does kind of the very same while all these are defined with strings down below. And these are things that we could actually tamper with or play with, right? The target name was where we said we want to actually save this to. The friendly name was like that title that could be displayed or the app that we launch. Well, the file that actually gets embedded in to this cabinet file in exe that bundles it all together, that was calc.exe from C Windows System 32. But the app that's launched is something that we could still kind of mess with, right? It's just plain text. So what's to stop me from making this anything else like notepad.exe or carmap.exe or malware.exe or virus or PowerShell Cradle or Stager or anything to do a little bit more spooky, shady shenanigans? Let me save this with notepad.exe in there, and let's use that capability that we had just learned previously to actually use our iExpress /n to build out the executable. And actually, we could use that /q to be quiet. Remember, we saw that in the options. So let me clear everything that we were working with previously. Let's get a blank canvas and delete or remove our Google Chrome.exe. Now that that's gone, we're working with just Google Chrome said. So you'll see once I iExpress to /n to build this out right now, /q to be quiet, based off of our .sed file, I'll hit enter, but you don't see the flying command prompt in Windows popping up and doing weird stuff. We do, however, still have our Google Chrome.exe. Now, if I were to run this, are we going to get the calculator anymore? No. We're supposed to get Notepad, though, right? But it's not showing up. I don't see it running anywhere else. So I'm going to get a little bit interested and peculiar. Let's open up sysinternal suite utilities like Process Explorer or Process Monitor if we wanted to trace each thing. Let's open up Proc Explorer, and I could go see, is Notepad running? We just can't see it. Here it's fired up, and I'll just hit N on my keyboard, and oh yeah, we do see it running, but remember it's hidden. We chose that option. So we could still run anything we want, but tuck it away and hide it. And there is a lot more interesting stuff that we could do though, because we actually ran iExpress previously, but we have a whole nother executable to play with now, which is our own Google Chrome.exe. Again, totally faked, right? It's clearly running Notepad. Let me kill that old running like zombie ghost Google Chrome.exe. And with that, I want to tell you a little bit more about what we might be able to do with this program. Just like we used that / for iExpress, let's do it on our own created self-extracting executable. Ooh, we got a couple other options here. We've got quiet modes for packages, even extracting or overriding the install command, and there's some peculiar stuff we could dig into here. Let me fill that out a little bit more, and there's a whole nother rabbit hole and cliff for us to jump off of for this stuff. So I want to drill down into it and tell you all the weird, wild, and wacky stuff that iExpress could be used for as a lull bin, but first, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. When your employees' data is available online, it's a constant threat to your organization. And too often, data brokers collect and sell personal information of your team members. This exposed data and employee and executive PII opens the door for third-party risk and ultimately cybersecurity threats against you and your organization. Think of all the possible personal details, like an employee's home address, their phone number, bank and credit card information, social security number, and so much more. All of that sensitive data should stay confidential. Delete Me takes that information out of the hands of data brokers and subsequently out of the hands of hackers. Delete Me eliminates employee data and tracking information online, all to reduce you and your organization's human attack surface. They make your security investments worth it. All your anti-phishing tools, email protection, and cybersecurity training are more effective when adversaries don't have ready access to your team members' personal lives. Lock down your data and your business with Delete Me, one of the most trusted and proven privacy solutions with over 100 million data listings removed and still counting. Get started with Delete Me with my link below in the video description and receive a free Delete Me scan for your organization. jh.live/Delete Me. Huge thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Okay, back in action, and we got a couple more things we can play with here, because we've learned some sweet things, right? We could manipulate or modify the sed file within our text editor, and we saw what was our app launched actually run, as well as what we could have supplied for our post-install command. So let me put this back to just running calc.exe, and let me change this to the old calc.exe just as well, and what do you think's gonna happen? Right, obviously, if I rebuild this with iExpress/n/q, Google Chrome.sed, run our new Google Chrome.exe, now we'll have two calculators pop up. You saw one and then the other just show there. So two opportunities to execute code, but when we ran this previously with a couple question marks to get the help information, there's even more. If we wanted to override the install command defined by the author, we could use /c : whatever. So let's see if we could run something different, like c::carmap.exe is one example. And is this going to show up visibly? It will. Okay, cool. We can close out of that. But let me actually open up another resource so you can see some of the sweet details between the other arguments we could provide to our self-extracting exe. This is over on ss64.com, and it gives us just a little bit more detail on what we might be able to do. We saw all the arguments to play with iExpress.exe itself, but we also have some other options with the self-extracting archive or that exe. We saw /q with quiet mode, no prompts and no errors. That would be pretty handy. But there's even a couple others that we didn't see in the pop-up earlier, like quiet/a with a colon or :u to say, look, assume the person is running the app is admin, so don't check for admin rights or disk space. Interesting. Same with :u, assume the person running the app is a non-admin user. Huh, I don't know if you saw, when we were actually experimenting with that within Sublime Text, there are these other fields here for admin quiet install command and user quiet install command. So what if we change this all to just a bunch of different things? Like, could we run cmd.exe as an admin, or PowerShell.exe if we were to specify we're running as a user? I'm not positive, and I haven't tested this with like user account control or with a account that is not in the local admin group, because mine is currently, so I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader. But if we go back to run this thing, after we rebuild this with iexpress.exe/n based off our sed file that we've just changed, let's go see if we can run Google Chrome.exe on its own. Will give us the calculator, as it has, and two of them because of our post install command. But if we specified /q for quiet, that won't display on the screen. But what about our process monitor? Let's go take a look in Proc Explorer, sorry. Can I see the calculator app running? Not strictly, but our Google Chrome.exe is running PowerShell.exe. So it is firing it off. It's in the background, like we can't see the window here, but that was what we just specified for our user quiet install command. Okay, I mean, that's just natural then, apparently the default with /q, but let's clear that. Let me task kill that, Google Chrome.exe. And now let's try to do the very same, but with our /q:(a) to say that we're an admin. I'll hit enter here. Again, hidden window, so it's tucked away in the background, but get back into Process Explorer, we can see Google Chrome.exe is now running cmd.exe. And yet, the whole thing was supposed to just run the calculator, right? So, and again, twice, we got two opportunities with the post install command. So this is bonkers. With one executable packaging up all these other things, or at least telling it what it's going to end up running, while only the calc is included as the source files inside like the cabinet that's packed up the contents, but we could still tell it, look, run calc or run notepad or run cmd.exe or PowerShell.exe based off of how you invoke it. So you could get a little bit sneaky, have sort of like a proxy and abstract away maybe other things that you want to do based off of just adding a flag or a switch on the command line. Neat. And again, of course, obviously this calc.exe, notepad, cmd.exe, PowerShell, this could be your stager, your Trojan, your remote access toolkit, your malware, ransomware, I don't know, whatever you're doing, simulating some adversaries. This could be what you end up using to build out your payload in an assessment or engagement, pen test, whatever. This could be some sweet tooling and tradecraft. And if I may say, the whole inspiration for this video came from a tweet from one of my favorite security researchers, Grigoris Tworek, or Ogtweet. I'm sure if you've seen any of my other videos, you hear me just fanboying over the fella. But seriously, I think he's a genius and always putting out some really sweet stuff with lolbins or just interesting things on the Windows operating system. And he's wondering, look, should iexpress.exe count as a lolbin, or one of those living off the land binaries? He's showcasing here in a little bit of a screenshot, just 14 lines of a batch script, like a file echoing out what would be the contents of a .sed file to end up staging the app launched, as we saw, cmd.exe, now popping open the calculator. Just as we've been doing to tinker and experiment here, they build it with iexpress.exe and lolbin to fire it up. This is everything that we've done, just in one automated single-click script, and kind of neat. But a lot of the conversations that came from here have some interesting stuff. Nazbench, another awesome fella in the industry, was saying, look, hey, I'm actually doing a write-up on this way back in February. Don't spoil the other lolbin that's hidden inside. Okay, so there's, again, even more to pull the thread here. And if we actually drill down into this, there's some cool conversations from Adam, Hexacorn, again, another fellow that I've tried to showcase and reference and include, sing the praises of for previous videos. But no one seems to be drilling down into what Naz is discussing. And Bohops actually chimes in and saying, look, he had a tweet way back in 2018. Folks have been talking about this for years. Obviously, it's an old utility, but it can do some even more wild stuff. Let me click into this and I'll show you iExpress is still bundled with Windows 10, Server 2016, all the other operating systems, again, since Windows 2000. You could specify an INF file that has an SCT section with a directive for fetch and execute via the sed file we've been playing with, or iExpress Wizard. And again, he notes it's a little bit old school, but might have some utility. And if you look here, what they're doing is adding a little bit more to the contents of the .sed file. In the strings, he actually notes the applet he wants to launch is evil.inf INF coming from some location here, but that INF file actually includes contents to unregistered DLLs and have an unregistered DLL section to use scrobject.dll and pull down the contents of an entirely different file, and I'll move my face here, I know I'm in the way, to see a test.sct. Now that's online, that's on the internet. Like, look, that could be a remote resource to hide and tuck away what you want to end up running for your next payload. If we actually go visit the link, hey, that URL that's included in the INF file to reference and call some other capability with this test.sct file, this includes the payload and syntax to run with an exec function, creating a new ActiveX object, WScript shell, just another proxy abstract way to invoke and run some shell commands like Notepad in this simple example. Another proof of concept, but I hope that drills down the point. You could just host whatever you want on an external resource that's not local from your initial access or whatever you're doing to stage this capability in the first place. You can get super duper shady. Think of using that with like a pastebin equivalent or some other website just to host a payload as a plain text raw file, whatever pastebin equivalent. Honestly, if I may say, paste.mozilla.org is pretty phenomenal for this because you've got the raw capability and you can set the expiration to just a one-time snippet burn after reading. So you could stage a payload that's staged up on the internet but then gone forever if anyone else were to look back at the artifacts. So Grigora's questions here is why is iExpress still included in the default Windows installation, even Windows 11 coming through all the way from Windows 2000? But if this were not already proving some potential as a lol bin or living off the land binary, I did want to note Naz and his work on this. I actually DM'd Naz and asked him if I had his permission to share our direct messages, so we're all good there. But I said, look, hey man, have you ever actually shared? Did you publish your iExpress work? Is that something that was out and about? I hadn't seen it online in his GitHub or blogs or whatever. And he says, no, honestly, I haven't yet. He says, I can make it public in the coming days if you want, kind of interesting stuff. And I said, look, I wanted to showcase this in a video, but I was curious if you'd be willing to share some of your insight too. And he did quote the original post from Ogtweet or Grigora's Tuareg, and he says, look, honestly, that's the gist. The full details are interesting, but you could probably recreate it from there. So I bantered with him a little bit back and forth, and I was saying, you know what? Sweet, I'd love to showcase this. Let's go explore it though, because if iExpress wasn't already the gift that keeps on giving here, there is more to make it a little bit more of a lol bin or living off the land binary. Take note here, iExpress uses makecab or makecab.exe in order to create the cab or exe file. But internally, apparently at one point at Microsoft, there was a tool called diamond.exe that would act similar to makecab, and that's what you might see if you ever see some of that process kind of huck up in the middle of it. It'll spawn a .ddf or a diamond directive file. Those are the things you'll even end up passing to makecab.exe. But if you add a little bit of insight into the .sed file, just another property or like a key we set equal to something in the plain text there, if you actually specified the compression type quantum, it'll end up calling diamond.exe rather than makecab.exe. But diamond.exe does not exist normally, naturally, on a modern Windows system. So we could get in the middle of that and just run our own diamond.exe, which again could be our own payload or whatever we want. Let me show you that in action. Let's clear out, get a little bit of a clean slate here. Let's remove our user or admin quiet install and even our post install command. Let's actually leave the app launched as calc, but we do need for our post install command, I believe that should be none wrapped in these greater than less than symbol waka waka alligator faces, right? So that should be as it is by default. If we bounce back to our terminal, we can rebuild this with that /n/q, our Google Chrome.sed, and firing up Google Chrome.exe will naturally spawn calculator as usual. But if we're going to play with that compression type equals quantum, and I know it sounds super duper silly, right? Oh, quantum computers and all, but that's real. That's genuinely what it is. Look, we need to make our own diamond.exe. As I mentioned, that's not something that is usually in Windows. That's not a program that is just part of the path naturally. But if you have your local access, or for whatever reason, hey, you can stage some things and the commands that you might run previously, using this sed technique or whatever you might want, or in the case that you are local admin, and we'll roll with that philosophy for the moment, let me actually fire up a new Windows terminal run as administrator. So with that, let me copy our C Windows System 32, and let's use the calc.exe, but let's actually put it in that default path here, but we'll call it diamond.exe in this case. Fingers crossed. Okay, that's looking good. Now I can go back to the other terminal and run diamond.exe naturally to fire up the calculator. So if we put this together with our .sed file, we actually have to consider one specific thing. If we scroll back up to the very top here, remember I was briefly mentioning that package purpose. Right now, it is just install app, and if you remember from us working with iExpress previously, actually using the GUI to interact with this, when we create a sed file and we specify the package purpose, the create compressed files only to build the .cabinet file, that is where it would end up running make cab. And that's the process that it would go through. So actually, this is the only path where this diamond.exe comes into play. So you gotta make sure that a sed file that you work with will actually have the package purpose set to create cab. And we can see this if we build out a new one. I'll just cruise through this process super easy. See Windows System 32, and we can put like Notepad in here for whatever. And again, that would be a hidden window if we do that, or it'll end up just extracting it, right? It's not gonna run it. So let's go ahead and put our own like run.cab in the express test folder that we're in. That's fine. We'll go ahead and save the file. We'll create the package. It'll build it all out. Good by me. Now in ILS, I have run.sed and run.cab. .cab was already built by iExpress, but let me remove that because we want to kind of have a clean slate because really we're just working with that run.sed file. Oh, and subl is not in my path, so let me get back into it in the interface. Let me open up run.sed. And note the difference here, if I toggle back and forth between these windows, the big one is create cab as the purpose. So let me set the syntax highlighting to bash so we get a little bit more color, but the options here, this section is where we would actually go ahead and specify our quantum compression type. Now before we do that, before I added in this new line here, let me show you it in action. Because if I were to actually put this side by side, let me move the terminal over to the left. We can open up our Process Explorer with sysinternals as usual. I'll move that to the right, and we'll collapse a couple of these so it's a bit easier to see. Take a look and watch carefully in the Windows terminal block in the processes that are running now. If I were to naturally iExpress/n to build out our run.sed, that should build the cab file, and you see it does, and make cab is what spawned there. But remember, diamond.exe is now in our path, and that will still spawn the calculator. Remember, while we're naturally running iExpress, and we can do this with quiet, so you'll actually be able to see the processes pop up and not get in the way with the windows here. Oh, okay, whoops. I must have missed a space character there. We don't see it happen super quick within Process Explorer, but we can use Process Monitor, actually, and see this thing for real. Let me go toggle, hey, a new filter. Let's look for our process name is naturally makecab.exe. We can add that, make sure that we're monitoring. Go ahead and click apply. We'll save. That's doing its thing. Now, if I run this, fingers crossed, let's try it again. Makecab is the one that fires off. That is the usual functionality and normal and natural, but if we kind of use this as the Loban capability to genuinely turn iExpress into another potential proxy to run some other code, let's add the compression type equal to all caps quantum. We'll go ahead and save that. Let me click Control S on my keyboard or bring it up in the context menu. And now let me stop filtering here. Stop listening, and we'll add a different filter where we're no longer looking for makecab. We can turn that off, but let's add looking for a process name diamond.exe. We'll add that, click apply, and OK. Now that that is saved with our sed file, that's all the line that we need. Now when I run iExpress once again, diamond is run, and the calculator opens, and I forgot to listen in Process Monitor, totally classic. Now when we can see this in action, diamond.exe was just firing up. Okay, tiny, cutesy, right? Small little thing just to be able to abstract out what command you might run and what'll actually end up firing off. Again, that could be your payload, that can be your reverse shell, that can be your command and control callback, your beacon, your implant, whatever you do for staging more malware in your attack campaign. But that is not all. If we weren't already way too far deep down the rabbit hole of all the weird, wild stuff that iExpress can do, Naz had another trick up his sleeve. This is stub modification. It's another secret of iExpress. It's related to how the exe is generated, like our Google Chrome.exe, right? That fake simulated self-extracting executable. When you create an exe, it's actually a cab file with a stub pointing to wextract.exe. We actually saw that, right? Like when we were taking a look at the properties of our Google Chrome.exe, it straight up told us it's the Win32 cabinet self-extractor. If we bounce over to System32, we could actually see that if we look for wextract.exe, let me take a look at the properties of that. It's actually Win32 cabinet self-extractor. All the exact same details. It's like building that as it. Because remember, the exe, or the cab file that ends up being built out, if we toggle back over to look at our run.cab, clicking into it, like it's going to bundle in Notepad or whatever we specified in that iExpress GUI builder and everything that we specified in our sed file. So could we change this, going back to our Google Chrome.sed, forgetting about run.sed and run.cab? Let's delete those and go back to the original world we were in. We could actually specify back in Sublime Text, again, moving out of run.sed, but back to our install app package purpose. One of the things that we could specify, not the compression type quantum here, but the extractor sub could be whatever we want rather than wextract.exe. Like, how about cmd.exe? Now, I know this would naturally just run calc.exe, but now we're going to say, hey, I just want you to fire it up with cmd.exe. Again, you could just really do this in the other natural native functionality, but a whole nother option is this. Oh, and I had a typo there. Got to be super careful. That should be extractor stub, T. I know it's like subbing in another file, but make sure that is the extractor stub. We'll save that. And now because we've specified that new extractor stub, it will not just run calc. In fact, it won't, because it won't be able to extract naturally with wextract. It'll open up the command prompt. Fingers crossed. There we are. We're just in cmd.exe. Obviously, again, you can make that whatever you want. You can make it Notepad. You can make it calc. That will fire in place. Let's rebuild. Let's run Notepad. Or your malware. But interesting tidbit here. Let me get back into Explorer, because remember, when we were looking at the properties, it like straight up had the Win32 extractor there. I'll close this because I think that's cached from previously, but if I open up the properties, now it's Notepad. Look at the details here. File description, Notepad. Type is application, file product, whatever. Original file name, Notepad. Could go back to this again, make it cmd.exe, rebuild, and now Google Chrome.exe is actually totally just the command prompt. Windows command processor. Okay, so I know we're a little all over the place. We've gone all over the map with iExpress, cab files, sed files, what we might run with the regular app launch capability, post-install command, admin capabilities, user, giving us like potential for 3 different things to run, all with different invocations of the same exact file. The quantum compression type, the extractor stub. Let me kind of take this back to the start. But look, I do want to note, if you wanted to get weird, wild, and funky with this, I think this is kind of a fun Easter egg. While we bear in mind, we've seen like, what, 3, 4, I don't know, many different ways to do Lobin-like things. If you want to have some fun with this, calc.exe may very well be what we naturally run, and we can rebuild and reset to get back to a clean slate, removing what would have been our extractor stub here. But remember how that post-install command is ran kind of following after the app is installed, or whatever first process kind of finishes its execution? Well, because calc will open the subsequent little calc.exe versus calculator.exe, this one works really well and could be kind of fun if we were to do some wacky, wild stuff with it. Like, what's to stop us from just using PowerShell to, hey, track down, like invoking PowerShell.exe as the post-install command, but actually adding some command line arguments or another command to run here with taxi? What if we actually started another process with the syntax here to actually grab the current process based off of the name that we know, like we've defined, we can control its Google Chrome.exe or whatever we call our self-extracting executable here. So let's play with that and actually grab its path, and we'll have to wrap this in quotes here because it is a string with spaces. But what are we doing here? we're telling it to launch the calculator application as Google Chrome, kind of our fake here, but the post install command will get the Google Chrome process path and run it again. So we're telling it to run itself again, and then again, and again, and again, and again. So you basically build out, I don't know, a silly, stupid bomb DOS thing. Let's get back to our terminal and let me rebuild this one last time for our Google Chrome sed, and let's fire up Google Chrome.exe with the process monitor over on the left and watch this beautiful, horrific, horrendous cacophony of multiple calculators opening over and over and over again as one thing that you could do. But keep in mind all of the crazy wild shenanigans that we've already done thus far. Between, look, the install command that you want to run to begin with, the post install command that you can run after the fact, the user and admin quiet install commands that allow you to do different things with the same file, and then the quantum compression type to fire up diamond.exe and the extractor stub to run something entirely different for the exe itself. I don't know. I'd love to ask you and your opinion with these fireworks of calculators going off. Do you think that this qualifies as a lull bin or living off the land binary? I would love your hot take. Please do let me know in the comment section below. And please do all those YouTube algorithm things. Like, comment, subscribe, and please, pretty please, hey, give some shout outs to all the other folks that have done the real work here. I've just wanted to sing their praises and showcase it. Bohops, Greg Torek, or Gregoras Torek, Nazbench, and certainly, hey, please do give some love to our sponsors. Big thanks to Delete Me, link in the video description. I hope you check them out. And okay, I gotta stop this before OBS runs out of memory and the computer entirely crashes. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you in the next video.